A fresh start on a strange planet surrounded by alien women. The desire I can't resist. Arrival and first encounter. Marcus Reed's boots hit the metallic landing pad with a dull thunk, the sound swallowed by the humid air of Viridian 7. After 6 years navigating the endless corridors of research vessels and the cold vacuum of space, solid ground felt almost alien. He grabbed his weathered duffel bag and surveyed the settlement sprawling before him. Low buildings constructed from local stone, connected by winding paths that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. The housing coordinator had assured him the dwelling on Lot 47 would be perfect for someone seeking privacy. Marcus had emphasized that word repeatedly during their communications. Privacy, solitude, a place to finally breathe without mission briefings, crew rotations, or the suffocating recycled air of spacecraft. His new home was modest, carved partially into a hillside, with a rounded door painted in faded blue. The interior smelled of something sweet and earthy, native wood perhaps. Marcus dropped his bag and stood in the center of the single main room, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over him like a familiar blanket. He was 34 and felt twice that age. A knock interrupted his moment of stillness. Marcus opened the door to find a woman standing there with a cloth-covered basket balanced on one hip. She was striking in a way that made his tired brain struggle to process details. Skin that seemed to catch and reflect light with a subtle silver sheen, dark hair that fell past her shoulders in waves, and eyes the color of deep violets that studied him with open curiosity. "Welcome to Viridian 7, she said, her voice carrying a melodic quality that suggested Standard wasn't her first language. "I'm Lyria. I live just down the path." She gestured vaguely behind her. "It's traditional to bring bread to new neighbors." Marcus accepted the basket awkwardly, suddenly aware of how rumpled he must look after transit. "Thank you. I'm Marcus Reed." "I know." Her smile was slight but warm. "Small settlement. Word travels quickly when someone new arrives, especially—" She paused, seeming to reconsider her words. "Especially someone from so far away." There was something in the way she looked at him, not just friendly curiosity, but genuine interest that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't experienced in years. It was both uncomfortable and strangely compelling. "There's a gathering tonight," Lyria continued, adjusting her weight slightly. "The settlement comes together every 10 days to share food and stories. You'd be welcome." Marcus's first instinct was to decline. He'd come here specifically to avoid gatherings, crowds, and the exhausting performance of social interaction. But something about her expectant expression made him hesitate. "I should probably unpack," he began, but the excuse sounded weak even to his own ears. "Of course," Lydia said, although her eyes showed mild disappointment. "But if you change your mind, we gather at the central platform when both moons are visible. Just follow the music." She turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. "I hope you do come, Marcus Reed. Fresh perspectives are valuable here. And," she met his eyes directly, "I'd like to know what brought you to our corner of the galaxy." After she left, Marcus stood holding the basket, catching the faint scent of her presence still lingering in his doorway. The bread inside was still warm. The gathering and growing connections. Marcus told himself he was only going to the gathering out of politeness, a brief appearance to avoid seeming rude to his new neighbors. But as he followed the sound of rhythmic instruments through the settlement's winding paths, he felt an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation in his chest. The central platform was a wide, circular space surrounded by the glowing vegetation that seemed to define Viridian Seven's aesthetic. Lanterns hung from woven structures overhead, casting warm pools of light across groups of people laughing, eating, and moving to music that felt almost alive in its complexity. "You came!" Lyria appeared at his elbow, as if she'd been watching for him. She'd changed into flowing garments that shimmered when she moved, catching the lantern light. "Come, let me introduce you." Before Marcus could protest, she guided him toward a group of 3 women engaged in animated conversation. "Everyone, this is Marcus, our newest resident." A woman with skin that held warm copper undertones turned first, her eyes assessing him with sharp intelligence. "Kessa," she said, extending her hand in a gesture that seemed adapted for human greeting. "I run the trade depot. If you need anything you can't grow or make yourself, find me." Her grip was firm, confident. "Amara," said another woman softly, her features holding a subtle green tint that reminded Marcus of new leaves in sunlight. "I work with the Botanical Research Station. Lyria mentioned you're from Earth originally?" Marcus nodded, somewhat overwhelmed by their immediate attention. "Born there, yes, though I haven't been back in over a decade." The third woman hadn't spoken yet, but when she did, her voice carried harmonics that seemed impossible from a single throat. "Zira. I'm a musician, obviously." She gestured toward the instruments being played nearby. "Your people have fascinating musical traditions. I'd love to hear you describe them sometime." "I'm not particularly musical," Marcus admitted, feeling suddenly inadequate under their collective gaze. "But you must have other talents," Kessa said, with a grin that suggested she enjoyed making people uncomfortable. "Why else would you come all the way to Viridian 7? We're not exactly a destination colony." "That was the appeal," Marcus said, attempting honesty. "I needed somewhere quiet." The women exchanged glances that contained entire conversations. Lyria touched his arm gently. "Come, let's get you some food before Kessa interrogates you further." As they moved toward tables laden with unfamiliar dishes, Lyria explained each one in a low voice, her breath warm against his ear. Marcus found himself hyper-aware of her proximity, the way her hand remained lightly on his forearm as she guided him through the social landscape. They eventually settled on cushions, arranged in a circle, joined by others who asked gentle questions about his journey and his plans. The settlement held maybe 200 people, Lyria explained, most native to Viridian 7 or nearby systems. Humans were rare, but not unwelcome. Someone passed around vessels of fermented fruit wine that tasted like starlight might if it could be distilled. Marcus felt the tension he'd carried for years beginning to loosen slightly. The conversation flowed around him, occasionally pulling him in but never demanding more than he wanted to give. As the evening deepened, both of Viridian 7's moons rose, one pale blue, one soft amber, painting everything in ethereal dual light. Lyria shifted closer to him on the cushions, pointing upward at constellations he didn't recognize. "That cluster there, we call it the Wanderer. Our stories say it represents those who left home seeking something they couldn't name," she said, her shoulder pressed against his. Marcus looked at the stars, then at her profile illuminated by moonlight. Did they find it? Lyria turned to meet his eyes, her expression serious. The stories say they found something better than what they were searching for, something unexpected. Her hand found his in the space between them, fingers intertwining with deliberate intention. The touch was warm, grounding, and charged with unspoken possibility. Marcus knew he should pull away, should maintain the distance he'd come here to establish. Instead, he held on, letting the moment stretch as music drifted across the gathering and the twin moons traced their paths overhead. Exploration and confession. 3 days after the gathering, Lyria appeared at Marcus's door just after dawn, carrying a pack and wearing clothes suitable for hiking. "Today I'm going to show you why Viridian 7 deserves more than your solitude. she announced with playful authority. Marcus, still groggy from sleep, couldn't formulate a good argument. 20 minutes later, they were following a trail that wound away from the settlement into dense forest, where the bioluminescent flora grew wild and untamed. During the day, it just looks like any forest, Lyria explained as they walked, her movements graceful over uneven terrain. But wait until we reach the deeper groves. They talked as they hiked, the conversation flowing more easily than Marcus expected. Lyria asked about his years in space, and he found himself sharing stories he'd kept locked away. The loneliness of deep space assignments, the failed relationship with a fellow researcher who'd wanted roots while he kept choosing missions, the growing sense that he'd traded human connection for career advancement until neither satisfied him anymore. "Is that why you came here?" Lyria asked. "To figure out what you actually want?" "I came here to stop wanting anything," I admitted. "To just exist without expectations." Lyria was quiet for a moment, navigating around a fallen log. "And how's that working for you so far?" Marcus thought about the past few days, the way he'd caught himself watching for Lyria on the paths, the unexpected pleasure of the gathering, the feeling that maybe isolation wasn't actually what he needed. "Not as planned," he said wryly. By midday, they descended into a valley where the forest canopy created a twilight dimness even at the sun's peak. Lyria touched his arm, signaling him to wait, then manipulated a device that darkened their vision temporarily. When his eyes adjusted, Marcus gasped. The entire forest glowed. Every tree, vine, and flowering plant pulsed with soft bioluminescence in shades of blue, green, and violet. It was like standing inside a living constellation. "This is incredible," Marcus breathed, turning slowly to take it all in. "There's more." Lyria led him deeper, where the sound of water grew louder. They emerged at a natural pool fed by a warm spring, steam rising through the glowing foliage to create an otherworldly scene. "The water is heated by geothermal vents. It's perfectly safe, a hidden treasure." Marcus hesitated only briefly before following her lead, stripping down to his undergarments and sliding into the warm water. The heat immediately worked into his muscles, releasing tensions he'd forgotten he carried. Lyria settled across from him, water reaching her shoulders, her silver-toned skin picking up the blue-green glow from surrounding plants. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You've earned it after showing me this place." "Do you ever feel like your people, humans, make everything more complicated than it needs to be?" Her violet eyes studied him seriously. "The way you talk about your past relationship, all these unspoken expectations and timing issues. Here, we're more direct about what we feel." "I considered this," the warm water making him feel uncharacteristically open. "Maybe we do overcomplicate things. Or maybe I just never learned how to be simple about wanting someone." "Is it difficult, wanting someone?" The question held genuine curiosity. "It is when you're afraid of needing them," Marcus said quietly. "When independence becomes the only thing you know how to be." Lyria moved closer, water rippling around her. "What if needing someone wasn't weakness? What if it was just honest?" "Is that how your people see it?" Marcus asked, his heart rate increasing as she approached. "We believe that recognizing connection when it appears is wisdom, not vulnerability." She was close enough now that he could see water droplets caught in her hair, reflecting the bioluminescent glow from surrounding plants. "I've been feeling drawn to you since you arrived, Marcus. The way you carry your loneliness like armor that doesn't quite fit anymore. I recognize it because I've worn similar armor." "You? You seem so integrated here, so connected." "Connection and loneliness aren't opposites. I'm surrounded by my people, but I've never felt truly understood by them. Then you arrived carrying your own isolation, and something in me recognized something in you." "I came here to be alone." "I know." Her fingers intertwined with his. "Are you disappointed that you're failing?" He pulled her closer, their bodies barely separated by the warm water now. Completely, he whispered, then kissed her.
Deepening passion. The days following their time at the hidden spring passed in a blur of shared moments that rewrote Marcus's understanding of what he'd come to Viridian 7 seeking. Lyria became a constant presence, sometimes appearing at his door with fresh fruit from the market, other times simply walking beside him as he explored the settlement's outskirts, their comfortable silences speaking louder than words. Tonight, she'd arrived with news of a meteor shower, visible only once every few years, insisting they watch it from the highest point in the settlement. Marcus found himself agreeing without hesitation, his resistance to companionship eroding faster than he'd thought possible. They climbed the winding path to the observation plateau as the last light faded, carrying thermal blankets and a container of the spiced tea Lyria had introduced him to. The elevation offered a panoramic view of the settlement below, its bioluminescent pathways creating a map of light against the darkening landscape. "They'll start soon," Lyria said, spreading blankets on the smooth stone. She settled close to him, their bodies finding a natural alignment that felt rehearsed despite its newness. "The ancient stories say these meteors carry messages from the first travelers who found this world." Marcus wrapped the blanket around both their shoulders, feeling her warmth against his side. "Do you believe that?" "I believe that people need stories to make sense of beauty," she said, tilting her head against his shoulder. "Whether they're literally true matters less than what they help us understand about ourselves." The first streak of light carved across the sky, followed by another, then a cascade of them, brilliant white trails that seemed to rain down from some celestial source. Lyria's hand found his beneath the blanket, her grip tightening with each new burst of light. "Marcus," she said softly, her voice nearly lost in the quiet night, "I need to tell you something about my people's customs." He turned to look at her profile, illuminated by the meteor shower's reflected light. "I'm listening." "We don't form connections lightly, but when we do, we form them completely. There's no slow progression, no testing the waters." She met his eyes, her expression vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. "When we recognize a bond, we acknowledge it fully, and I've recognized one with you." Marcus's throat tightened. "Lyria, I don't know if I'm capable of that kind of certainty. My track record—" "Isn't here," she interrupted gently. "Your past is light years away. Whatever you were running from, whatever patterns you're afraid of repeating, they don't have power unless you give it to them." Her hand came up to touch his face, fingers tracing his jawline with deliberate tenderness. "I'm not asking you to be certain about forever. I'm asking if you feel what I feel right now, in this moment." "I feel terrified," Marcus admitted, his voice rough with honesty. "And I feel more alive than I have in years, both at once." "Good," Lyria whispered, leaning closer. "That means it's real." Their kiss was different from the one at the spring, less exploratory, more intentional. Marcus felt the careful control he'd maintained slipping away as Lyria's hands slid under his jacket, her touch leaving trails of warmth against his skin. The silver luminescence of her skin seemed to intensify with arousal, creating their own constellation in the dimness of her room. Marcus discovered that intimacy without fear felt like breathing after years of holding his breath. Every touch carried meaning. Every whispered word built something between them that felt substantial and true. When they finally came together, it was with the kind of surrender he'd always avoided. The acknowledgement that being vulnerable with another person wasn't weakness, but courage. Later, tangled together in sheets damp with exertion, Lyria traced patterns on his chest with lazy fingers. "Still terrified?" she asked, amusement coloring her voice. "Absolutely," Marcus said, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. "But maybe that's not a reason to run anymore." Outside, the meteor shower had faded, but inside, something new and bright had been ignited. A new beginning. Morning arrived gently on Viridian 7.
the dual suns rising in sequence to paint Lyria's quarters in shades of gold and rose. Marcus woke slowly, immediately aware of the warm weight of Lyria's body curved against his, her breathing deep and even in continued sleep. He should have felt panic, the familiar urge to extract himself before things became too real, too complicated. Instead, he felt a profound sense of rightness that terrified him precisely because it didn't terrify him enough. Lyria stirred, her eyes opening to find him already watching her. A slow smile spread across her face. "Good morning, wanderer." "Morning," Marcus said, brushing hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I should probably stay for breakfast?" she interrupted, reading his retreat before he could fully form it. "I make excellent morning bread, nothing like what I brought you when you arrived." Over a meal of warm bread, preserved fruits, and a grain beverage Lyria called sunwater, they talked about practical things. His need to officially register his extended stay with the colony administrator, her shift schedule at the cultural center where she taught traditional arts. But underneath the mundane conversation ran a current of significance neither could quite name yet. "Marcus," Lyria said, setting down her cup with deliberate care, "I want to introduce you to my family properly, and to the settlement elders." His stomach clenched. "That sounds formal?" "It is," she acknowledged. "In my culture, when two people form the kind of bond we've begun, it's recognized publicly, not as obligation, but as celebration. It means something here." Marcus thought about his previous relationship, how they'd kept things casual for months, then vaguely serious, then in a vaguely undefined space that ultimately collapsed under the weight of all that uncertainty. What exactly would it mean? Lyria reached across the table to take his hand. "We're choosing each other openly, that we're building something intentional rather than just letting things happen to us. My people believe that naming our commitments gives them strength." "I've been terrible at commitment," Marcus said quietly. "That's why I came here alone." "You came here alone," Lyria agreed, "but you don't have to stay that way. And commitment doesn't mean perfection, Marcus. It means showing up honestly, even when it's difficult." Her violet eyes held his steadily. "Can you do that?" He thought about the past week, how easily he had fallen into rhythm with her, how her presence had transformed his carefully constructed solitude into something that felt like home. The old Marcus would have run, but maybe the old Marcus had been running toward this moment all along. "I can try," he said. "I want to try." The smile that broke across Lyria's face was radiant. That's all anyone can promise. They spent the morning walking through the settlement together, no longer careful about maintaining distance. Marcus noticed how others watched them with knowing smiles, how Kessa called out a cheerful "finally" as they passed the trade depot, and even the usually reserved Amara gave them an approving nod from her botanical station. At the colony administrator's office, Marcus found himself requesting indefinite extension of his residency rather than the 6-month term he had originally arranged. The administrator, a weathered man named Torin, who clearly had seen his share of newcomers come and go, simply smiled and processed the request without comment. Most people who come here seeking isolation either leave within a month or stay forever. There's usually not much middle ground on Viridian 7. As they left the administrative building, Lyria took Marcus's hand openly. "There's something else I want to ask you," she said, with a hint of nervousness in her voice. "Our language, the old tongue, not standard, carries nuances that don't translate. If you're truly going to be part of this world, part of my life, would you let me teach you?" Marcus understood what she was really asking. Would he invest the time and effort to truly integrate, to become part of Viridian 7 rather than just a visitor who stayed? It was exactly the kind of deep commitment he had avoided his entire adult life. "Yes,"
he heard himself say. Teach me. That evening, they returned to the observation plateau where they'd watched the meteor shower. The settlement spread below them, a living network of light and community. Marcus thought about the man who'd arrived just days ago, carrying nothing but exhaustion and the desire to disappear. I had this whole plan, he said, pulling Lyria close against the cooling evening air. Come here, keep to myself, figure out who I was without anyone else's expectations. And instead, Lyria prompted, leaning into his embrace. Instead, I found someone who makes me want to be found. You've completely destroyed my careful plans, and I'm not even sorry about it. Lyria laughed, the sound carrying joy and relief in equal measure. Good, because I plan to keep destroying them every single day. They kissed as the sun set and the bioluminescent glow began its nightly emergence, two people who'd been running toward each other across light years and lifetimes without knowing it. Marcus had come to Viridian 7 seeking an ending, but instead he'd found a beginning, messy, terrifying, and more real than anything he had allowed himself to want before. In the distance, music from the settlement's evening gathering drifted up to them, and Lyria took his hand with gentle insistence. Come on, she said, let's go show everyone that the solitary human has decided to join the living. Marcus let her pull him toward the path, toward the lights and music and community he had traveled so far to avoid. And, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt absolutely no desire to run. The end.